Have you noticed that the people who say the least often change everything? The room can be loud with opinions, laughter, arguments, and certainty. But it is usually the quiet one in that corner who shifts the air without touching it. You felt it before. That strange unease when someone watches more than they speak. When their silence feels heavier than noise. You tell yourself they're harmless, withdrawn, insignificant. Yet something in you stays alert, like your body knows what your logic refuses to admit. Silence is not empty. It is storage. You learned early on to fear noise, because noise announces itself. Anger shouts before it strikes. Chaos leaves. Fingerprints everywhere. But silence learns to move without a shadow. It watches patterns form. It memorizes the prostagrate's rhythm of other people's weaknesses. It waits. And waiting in psychology is not passive. It is intentional, stillness, the gathering of force without motion, like a lake that looks calm from the surface while entire storms turn beneath. It, unseen. Think of a moment from your own life. A meeting where one person barely spoke, yet, after they finally did, everything changed. A relationship where someone endured quietly for years, until one day they were simply gone, taking the entire foundation with them. A childhood memory where the quiet kid in class wasn't weak, just invisible enough to survive. You mistook their restraint for fragility. You mistook stillness for safety. That mistake is written into how we see danger itself. Neuroscience tells us that what is suppressed does not disappear. It reorganizes. Emotional restraint doesn't erase reaction. It roots it into memory, into calculation, into delayed release. The brain does not forget energy that was never expressed. It archives it. Silence becomes a kind of psychological battery charge slowly over time, storing intention, resentment, observation, and strategy all at once. You don't see the charge building. You only witness the process, discharge. You live in a world that associates power with volume, emotion with expression, and threat with spectacle. You are trained to believe that what is loud is what is dangerous, but history, relationships, and human behavior whisper the opposite truth. The most destabilizing forces rarely announce themselves. They arrive quietly. They listen. They appear harmless. And that is why they are underestimated for so long. There is something unsettling about a person who does not rush to explain themselves, who does not rush to defend, who does not rush to react. Music. It creates a vacuum where your own assumptions grow, louder. You project onto their silence what you want to believe about them. You lower your guard. You fill the quiet with your own noise. And without realizing it, you reveal more than you ever intended. If silence holds this much power, if stillness can contain this much intention, then the question is no longer whether the quiet ones are dangerous. The real question is where that danger is born, and what kind of child first learned that survival meant disappearing long before it meant speaking. When did you first learn that being quiet was safer than being seen? It rarely happens in one dramatic moment. It happens slowly in the background of a childhood where your voice felt like an inconvenience, where the room was always too loud for softness, too crowded for your emotions. You learn to measure your words by the consequences that followed them. Each time you spoke and were ignored, misunderstood, or punished, something inside you tightened its grip. And each time you stayed silent and survived, your nervous system wrote a new rule for living. You might remember yourself as a small figure at the edge of the noise, watching everything with wide, careful eyes. Other children move freely, reckless with their feelings, while you learned to read the air before you moved. In a home filled with tension, unpredictability, or emotional distance, music, silence became your shelter. Attachment theory would later call this avoidant or anxious restraint. But before it had a name, it was simply survival. Your body learned that expression costs too much. Your mind learned that invisibility keeps you intact. Neuroscience tells us that a child's brain adapts to what it cannot escape. When emotional needs go unmet, the brain doesn't stop needing. It simply roots the need inward. You became your own witness, your own comfort, your own container. Emotions that should have moved outward were folded inward instead, like letters, never delivered. Over time, your inner world grew dense and layered, while your outer world remained controlled and still. You became a quiet observer in your own life, learning other people's moods better than your own. There is a particular loneliness that comes from being the child who learns to disappear. Music. It is not loud loneliness. It does not cry for attention. It settles into the chest like a low fog, teaching you that closeness requires risk, and that risk is something you were never allowed to afford. So, you became a room with locked doors, not to hide something evil, but to protect something too fragile to survive open air. You did not grow silent because you were weak. You grew silent because you were alone. Years later, people will call you calm, mysterious, unbothered. They will admire your self-control without ever seeing the cost of it. They will see the mask, not the child who built it out of necessity. And the part of you that learned to watch instead of speak will never truly leave. It will simply grow taller, more precise, more patient, carrying childhood survival into an analyze, adult world that mistakes restraint for invulnerability, and somewhere between who you were and who you became, the disappearance quietly completes its transformation. When did your quiet stop being a shield and start becoming a strategy? Somewhere between the child who learned to disappear and the adult you became, silence hardened into control. You no longer withdraw out of fear alone. You withdraw with precision. You listen more than you speak. You react less than others. You appear unshakable as though emotion no longer reaches you in real time. People call you composed, grounded, emotionally mature. They do not see the fire learning how to burn without light. In a room full of noise, you sit still and attentive, watching every shift in tone, every micro expression, every pause between words. Your silence invites others to reveal themselves without resistance. They speak freely, filling the space you refuse to occupy. In relationships, you become the calm one, the steady one, the one who never seems to lose control. You learn that non-reaction unsettles people more deeply than confrontation ever could. Where others discharge their emotions immediately, you store them. Where others explode, you compress. Your calm becomes an oxygen mask, feeding others' comfort while quietly sustaining a private combustion. Attachment psychology would describe this as emotional self-sufficiency fused with avoidance, a pattern where closeness is managed rather than surrendered to. Neuroscience would say your brain has learned to delay release, converting immediate feeling into long-term tension. The emotional signal still fires, but the outward response is intercepted, redirected into memory, into calculation, into restraint. Music. You do not appear angry, but the anger does not disappear. It migrates inward, learning patience. You see this mask most clearly in moments of conflict. Someone raises their voice at you, expecting retaliation, and all they meet is your silence. They expect defense, and you offer none. They expect chaos, and you give them stillness. Inside, the monster within shifts its weight, but its claws stay hidden. Outside, nothing moves. The delayed reaction becomes a form of power, not because you dominate the moment, but because you refuse to be dragged into it. Yet, this calm is not peace. It is control built on unresolved pressure. It is a garden without water, where nothing visibly dies, but nothing truly grows, either. Love becomes carefully measured. Rage becomes postponed. Grief becomes private. You smile and remain composed, while entire storms rearrange themselves under your ribs. People grow comfortable around your silence, not realizing that it is not emptiness. They are sharing space with, but density. Over time, the mask becomes so convincing that even you begin to forget it is there. You start to believe your own reflection. But beneath the calm surface, the mind stays active, alert, calculating, charged, and the question quietly forms beneath your stillness, waiting for the science to explain what the poetry already knows. What does this kind of restraint actually do to the human brain when the fire has nowhere left to go? What happens inside you when you feel everything but show nothing at all? On the surface, your calm looks calm, effortless, almost graceful. But beneath it, your nervous system is working overtime. Neuroscience tells us that emotion never truly vanishes. It simply changes its address. Each time you suppress a reaction, your stress chemistry shifts. Cortisol rises quietly, not in the dramatic spikes of panic, but in slow, sustained currents that teach your body to live on alert without ever sounding the alarm. You appear steady, yet your internal world vibrates with unexpressed motion. There is a difference between reframing an emotion and burying it, though from the outside they can look identical. Cognitive reappraisal is when you consciously reinterpret a feeling, allowing the brain to process and integrate it. Emotional repression is when you force the door shut while the pracanon not continues from inside. In the first, the feeling moves through you, like weather. In the second, it becomes climate. Over years, the brain learns this pattern of silent containment as habit, wiring restraint into your automatic responses until your silence feels less like a choice and more like a reflex. Music. You can see this wiring forming in small human moments. A child learns that crying brings no comfort, only distance, and the tears turn inward. An adult stands in an argument, heart racing, jaw still, carefully, choosing not to react while 1,000 words press against closed lips. Music. In a relationship, you absorb disappointment with a practiced smile, telling yourself that you are being mature, rational, controlled. The brain rewards this with a sense of order. But beneath that order, it stores every unscented signal, like charged particles, waiting for collision. Yet silence does sharpen you. Studies on attentional blanks for watching control suggest that those who restrain impulse develop heightened observational intelligence. You become acutely aware of tone, rhythm, timing. You read the Fashion after H and Delos room with surgical accuracy. Your stillness gives you space to think. While others are busy reacting, power gathers in that pause. But every advantage has a shadow, and the shadow of this power is weight. What is not expressed is not resolved. It becomes background tension, a low electrical hum beneath your thoughts. Over time, the body begins to feel the cost. Muscles carry stories the mouth never told. Sleep grows shallow. The heart learns to race without reason. Loneliness grows heavier because your interior world is so full, and your exterior world remains so guarded. You stand in your own life, like a gatekeeper who never leaves the post. The monster within does not roar. It learns patience, music. The garden, without water, does not collapse overnight. It withers slowly, invisibly, while still appearing alive. Silence gives you vision, control, and sharpness, but it also charges the air within you with unresolved force. And the brain, no matter how disciplined, cannot hold pressure forever. At some point, biology always asks the same dark question. When what you stored for survival, finally, demands release, will it arrive as understanding or as eruption? Have you ever seen calm turn terrifying without warning? It is never loud at first. It is the kind of danger that arrives without footsteps, the kind that gives no rehearsal before it changes the room. You have carried this storm for years without letting it rain. From the outside, your life looks contained, restrained, even peaceful. But inside, pressure has been building in sealed chambers that never learned how to open safely. Silence did not dissolve your anger, your grief, your hunger to be seen. It only taught those forces how to wait. You can feel it in moments that seem too small to explain the reaction that follows. A careless comment lands on a wound you never named. A betrayal echoes every earlier abandonment at once. A boundary is crossed that was never spoken out loud. The response that finally erupts does not match the moment, because it does not belong to the moment alone. It carries the weight of everything that was swallowed before. What emerges is not just anger, not just coldness, but something disorienting. Emotional force released without shape, without proportion, without warning. Psychology calls this compression. Each time you suppress instead of process, the emotional charge does not disappear. It condenses. Over time, the nervous system learns to exist in a state of hidden readiness, like a coiled spring beneath polite stillness. Studies on emotional inhibition show that long-term restraint is linked to sudden outbursts, dissociation, and even blunted empathy. Not because you lack feeling, but because feeling has been stored too deeply for safe access. The monster within does not grow because you are cruel. It grows because it was never allowed sunlight. You see this shadow in relationships most clearly. You show patience where others would protest. You absorb disrespect where others would walk away. You keep the peace at the cost of your own truth. And then one day, the door closes without an explanation. The warmth disappears without a fight. The distance arrives without warning. The person who thought they knew your calm cannot recognize the cold that replaces it. They never saw the storm forming because you taught it to hide. There is a loneliness in this kind of darkness that words rarely reach. You stand inside yourself like a guard in a power station that was never designed to hold this much charge. You feel resentment grow beside discipline, bitterness grow beside control, fear grow beside strength. The mask of calm still fits your face, but inside the shadow has learned how to move, independently of your intentions. The paradox begins to reveal itself here. The very silence that once protected you has become the pressure that now deforms. You, what you restrained to survive, has gathered the power to shock. And as this hidden storm grows heavier beneath your back, still lake, a deeper question quietly rises beyond the individual. Why does the world keep mistaking this kind of silent compression for virtue instead of danger? Have you noticed how the world bows to the person who never reacts? Somewhere along the way, silence was crowned as maturity, and emotional distance was dressed in the language of strength. You are praised for being low, drama, admired for being unbothered, rewarded for staying composed when others fall apart. The culture lifts your restraint like a trophy and never once asks what it is costing you to hold it. Stillness becomes your badge of honor, and no one questions the bloodless war happening beneath it. From childhood, the lesson is gentle but relentless. The child who cries too loudly is told to calm down. The child who swallows their tears is called well behaved. By adulthood, the pattern has hardened into law. At work, the one who never complains is promoted. In love, the one who never demands is called easy to be with. In masculinity, the one who never breaks is celebrated as strong. You learn that silence earns safety, stability, and belonging, while honesty risks disruption. So you trade truth for approval and tell yourself it is wisdom. Social psychology names this the reward loop. Behaviors that preserve group comfort are reinforced, even when they quietly injure the individual. Emotional restraint becomes moralized. Expressing pain becomes framed as weakness. You are not just silent anymore. You are virtuous for it. The mask tightens until even you forget it is a mask. The shadow learns to smile convincingly. You see it play out in small scenes. A person in a relationship absorbs neglect and calls it patience. A man carries grief for decades and calls it discipline. A leader suppresses doubt and calls it confidence. Others rely on that composure, feed on it, build their certainty atop it. No one sees the inner garden drying from lack of water. No one hears the monster within learn that its hunger must stay quiet to remain acceptable. Philosophy whispers what culture refuses to acknowledge. What looks like strength on the surface can be slow violence toward the self. What looks like discipline can become exile from one's own emotional life. Stillness, when chosen consciously, can be power. Stillness, when demanded by social reward, becomes a slow suffocation. Disguised as virtue, you stand in perfect control, while parts of you starve in silence, waiting for permission they were never given. Loneliness grows in this approved quiet. Fear softens into habit. Resentment learns how to wear a polite face. You, to become the person everyone relies on and no one truly sees. The world applauds your calm, not because it understands it, but because it benefits from it. And in that applause, a deeper tragedy hides. The crowd mistakes your containment for wholeness, your endurance for peace, your silence for mastery. But psychology is merciless with illusions. Sooner or later, every unexpressed cost must be paid from within. And as society continues to reward the quiet threat it never intends to protect, the question no longer belongs to the world. It turns inward toward the invisible toll you have been carrying alone. Have you ever felt lonely even when you weren't alone? That is the quiet cost of becoming too composed for your own heart. You move through rooms full of people, conversations brushing past you, laughter bouncing off you. Yet something essential never quite arrives inside. Your silence has grown so familiar that it now speaks for you. Even when you wish it wouldn't, you learn to survive by containment. But survival is not the same as being seen. And over time, the difference begins to hollow you out. You notice it at night first. When the world finally stops demanding your calm, your body forgets how to rest. Your mind replays conversations you never finished, arguments you never had, grief you never named. Insomnia becomes the language of what you wouldn't let yourself feel while awake. Neuroscience would say the nervous system never found resolution, only postponement. What was delayed during the day seeks expression in the dark. When the mask finally loosens its grip. In relationships, the PP damage is quieter but deeper. You love with restraint, care with boundaries. You never explain and protect yourself with distance that others misread as mystery. People feel your presence but not your interior. Emotional ceilings form above every connection, limiting how high intimacy can rise before it quietly suffocates. You are close but not fully touched. You are trusted but not fully known. And slowly the loneliness becomes not something you endure, but something you become. Psychology describes this as emotional constriction. The range of feeling narrows, not because there is less inside you, but because expression has been trained out of reach. Fear flattens into numbness. Anger dissolves into fatigue. Sadness disguises itself as control. The monster within grows, tired of waiting, and eventually fall. Silent too, not healed, but exhausted. A garden without water does not always die dramatically. Sometimes it simply stops growing and convinces itself that this stillness is peace. Resentment begins to whisper underneath this quiet. You gave your calm to everyone. You absorbed what others refused to hold. You stayed controlled while others were allowed to break. And now, a quiet bitterness rises with a dangerous glance. Question: who held you while you were holding everything else together? The answer arrives slowly, painfully, as absence. No one, including you. Identity itself begins to erode. When you suppress long enough, you forget what your unfiltered voice ever sounded like. You become the mask more convincingly than the face beneath it. You are praised for being strong, while quietly disappearing behind that strength. Silence protected you once. Now it edits you. And yet, even in this erosion, something remains unbroken. Beneath the numbness, beneath the insomnia, beneath the loneliness refined into personality, the original capacity to feel still waits. What you learn to bury to survive can still be unearthed to live. And as the cost of silence becomes impossible to ignore, the story finally reaches the threshold of its most dangerous. Question: can you loosen the armor without losing your power? What if your silence was never meant to be a cage, but a tool waiting to be held with intention? The shift does not begin with speaking louder or feeling more. It begins with noticing. For the first time, you start listening inward with the same precision you once reserved for the world. You recognize that what you called control was often fear in uniform. That what you called calm was sometimes only pressure wearing a mask. This awareness does not shatter your restraint. It refines it. You begin with small acts that feel almost insignificant to the outside world, but monumental within you. You name an FDA to SAID's emotion before it burrows into shadow. You allow a disappointment to exist without compressing it into silence. You speak one true sentence where you once would have vanished. Attachment psychology would call this the slow re-entry into relational risk, where safety is no longer built from disappearance, but from boundary. Neuroscience would describe it as teaching the nervous system a new rhythm, one where expression no longer signals danger, but regulation. Selective vulnerability becomes your new discipline. You do not swing from silence into confession. You choose where your truth belongs. You learn that power was never in saying nothing. Music, it was in choosing when to speak and when not to. This is where silence transforms from armor into precision. You are no longer quiet because you are afraid of rupture. You are quiet because you understand the weight of timing. You feel the monster within shift again, not as an enemy, but as stored energy finally given direction. Anger becomes boundary instead of eruption. Grief becomes movement instead of stone. Fear becomes information instead of paralysis. The garden without water begins to soften, not because a flood arrives, but because you finally allow the first careful drops to fall. Growth returns slowly, and it feels dangerous at first because you have not used these emotional muscles in years. In relationships, you test this new posture with trembling hands. You speak a truth that might change the room. You hold a line where you once would have dissolved. You let yourself be seen without demanding to be rescued. The Loneliness does not vanish overnight, but it changes flavor. It becomes the ache of becoming, not the ache of erasure. You do not lose your stillness. You deepen it. You do not abandon restraint. You command it. The mask loosens, but it does not fall away. Completely, it becomes a choice. And for the first time, your silence and your voice exist on the same side of your will. This is how restraint turns into conscious power, not by destroying what saved you, but by evolving it. The question is no longer whether you can survive without disappearing. Music, it becomes something quieter, heavier, and infinitely more personal. Who are you? When your silence finally belongs to you, not to your fear? What if the greatest danger in your life was never the noise around you, but the quiet? You stopped questioning inside yourself? You have spent years learning how to hold your tongue, how to steady your breath, how to remain unshaken while the world trembles. You mastered the art of stillness so well that it began to feel like identity. And yet, beneath that mastery, a deeper question has been waiting without urgency, without volume, without demand. Is this silence a choice you are making now, or the habit that once saved you and never let go? There was a time when your quiet was wisdom in formation, when survival required you to listen more than you spoke, to observe more than you revealed. That season shaped you. It sharpened you. It gave you a kind of inner architecture that others never had to build. But architecture can become a populous prison when you forget why the walls were raised in the first place. A child once hid inside silence to endure what could not be changed. An adult now lives inside it without realizing the danger is no longer the same. Neuroscience tells us that awareness changes the brain as surely as experience once did. The moment you observe a pattern with clarity, the brain begins to loosen its grip on it. Philosophy goes further and whispers a harder truth. What you do not examine eventually becomes what governs you. Unconscious silence is not neutral. It directs your relationships, your anger, your love, your distance, your fear. It chooses for you while convincing you that you are in control. You have seen this in small human scenes. A relationship where nothing was said until everything was over. A moment where your truth waited so long to be spoken that it no longer fit the room. A memory where you needed comfort but chose dignity instead. The mask did not fall. The shadow did not leave. The monster within grew quiet, not healed, but unattended, and you called that peace. Yet silence itself was never your enemy. A blade is not violent on its own. A shield is not noble by default. A shadow is not evil simply because it follows the light. Silence becomes dangerous only when it operates without awareness. In the hands of fear, it is a cage. In the hands of anger, it is a loaded chamber. In the hands of consciousness, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes precision. It becomes listening. It becomes wisdom that knows when to move and when to remain still. The final truth is not meant to frighten you. It is meant to return you to yourself. You are not here to destroy your silence, nor to worship it. You are here to hold it awake, to ask what it protects, to ask what it hides, to ask whether it still serves the life you are trying to live. Because the most dangerous silence is never the will be one other's fear. It is the one you stopped questioning long before you realized it was choosing for you.